Hello dear students, welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy daily newspaper analysis. Today is 1st August 2024 and we have some important articles in today's session. And without any delay, let's get into the discussion and we'll discuss all those important articles one by one. And before discussing them, you all knew that there was a previous question that I have asked you in yesterday's session, that is a geography based question. The Mediterranean Sea is border of which of the following countries? So that is the question. And so the countries which actually shares their borders with whether we need to find out whether these countries would share their borders with Mediterranean Sea or not. The countries are Jordan, Iraq, Lebanon and Syria. And if you have a clear and a perfect idea over the map and the countries which are located near around or they share their borders with the Mediterranean Sea, so you can easily eliminate both Jordan and Iraq, because Iraq never share its borders with Mediterranean Sea and Jordan also never share its borders with the Mediterranean Sea. So therefore the correct answer for this question is option 3. Only Lebanon and Syria would share their borders with the Mediterranean Sea. And you can also see here these are different countries from African continent and European continent and even Middle East. So there are different countries which actually share the borders with the Mediterranean Sea, right? So countries which are actually surrounds the Mediterranean Sea, when we look from the a clockwise direction: Spain, France, Monaco, Italy, Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Montenegro, Albania, Greece, Turkey, Syria, Lebanon, Israel, Palestine, Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, Malta, Cyprus. So all these countries actually share their borders with the Mediterranean Sea, but question specifically asked a few countries. So Iraq and Syria, Lebanon and the other countries, right? So therefore the Jordan. So therefore the correct answer, only Syria and Lebanon shares their borders, but Jordan also located somewhere here, and this is Iraq. So therefore both Iraq and Jordan never share their borders with the Mediterranean Sea, and correct answer is 3 and 4 only. And a very important practice question for today. The question is, which of the following is the primary objective of monetary policy in India? So we have a monetary policy committee, right? So monetary policy committee meet every quarter, and it also takes important decisions regarding different aspects. So this is a very simple question. So which of the following are the primary objectives of monetary policy in India? So option A, tackling stressed assets of banks, and option B, maintaining low levels of unemployment. Option C, appreciate the exchange value of rupee in the forex markets, and option D, maintaining price stability. And this is a very simple and easy question. Try to answer this question in the comment section, and the correct answer I'll be providing you in tomorrow's class. And the first article, and a very important article, and Kerala's a landslide event has created a large scale havoc. So in fact it is a disaster which has resulted in the killing of hundreds of people. There is no doubt that the environmental degradation and increasing anthropogenic activities across Western Ghats is the primary reason for the increasing frequency of landslides across Western Ghats, specifically in Kerala. And in this article, we will understand Kerala's vulnerability to landslides, how Kerala became more and more vulnerable to these landslides. We will understand in this article. And the context, we all knew that the Kerala has been facing the brunt of environmental degradation. It has resulted in disasters like landslides more frequently. The deadly landslide in Wayanad district of Kerala, it has highlighted the region's vulnerability to such landslides. And in fact, it was identified by Indian Space Research Organization Landslide Atlas in India 2023. So Landslide Atlas of ISRO has identified that the Kerala's vulnerability to landslides has been increasing manifold in recent times. Why? Because the environmental considerations are not taken care of adequately. environmental degradation has been taking place, and the developmental activities and anthropogenic activities, especially the settlements near these sensitive areas, the commercial activities, ecologically sensitive Western Ghats, all these factors have been increasing vulnerability of Kerala state to landslides like incidents. And when we talk about the landslide atlas of India, so this landslide atlas in India is prepared by Indian Space Research Organization's National Remote Sensing Center. Right, so ISRO has National Remote Sensing Center, and this prepares the landslide atlas, and it recognizes vulnerable regions for landslides across the country. And in fact, the landslide atlas of ISRO actually evaluates the exposure of 147 districts across 17 states and 2 union territories in different parts of India, based on the socio-economic parameters. However, what are the key findings of the landslide atlas of ISRO? Now, when we look into the landslide atlas and the Kerala's status in the landslide atlas, Wayanad actually ranked 13th, while other places within Kerala such as Thrissur, Palakkad, Malappuram, and even Kozhikode, you can see that the majority number of Kerala's districts have a higher exposure, have a higher vulnerability to these landslides. Why? Because Thrissur district in Kerala ranked 3rd most vulnerable to landslides, followed by Palakkad, which ranks 5th most vulnerable to landslides, and then Malappuram 7th highest vulnerability to the landslides. However, when we talk about a district which is highly vulnerable, highly prone to landslides, so that is Rudraprayag in Uttaranchal. Rudraprayag in Uttaranchal is ranked first, focusing on the landslide prone areas in the Western Ghats and even Himalayan regions. Now, one thing that we need to understand when we talk about the landslide atlas and landslide vulnerability in India, so Himalayas, especially this region that I am highlighting here, is highly vulnerable to landslides, followed by the entire northeast India and even Sikkim also, and then the Western Ghats region are prone to the high intensity and frequency of landslides, and which has been killing a lot of people because of such disastrous instances. Right, so when we talk about the vulnerability of Kerala to such disasters, so no doubt Kerala is prone to heavy rainfall, right, because Western Ghats are spread across the Kerala, and we also knew that the southwest monsoon first enters into Kerala. Now, when southwest monsoon enters into Kerala, the windward side of the Western Ghats would receive a heavy rainfall. So we can say that more than 200 centimeters of rainfall would be received by the windward side of the Western Ghats alone. So therefore, because of the high rainfall, there is also a high chance for the flooding. And yesterday we had talked about the causes of landslides, especially the natural causes of landslides. So whenever the heavy rainfall has been taking place over the mountainous areas, so what happens? It could loosen the soil, and in fact the weight of the soil would also increase at a higher pace, right? So increasing the weight of the soil and water loosening the soil would trigger a massive landslide like incidences. Okay, and in fact, when we talk about the Kerala's vulnerability, heavy rains and flooding, with an estimated 14.5% of land in the entire Kerala state is vulnerable to landslides. And in fact, the Kerala State Disaster Management Authority, so the Kerala State Disaster Management Authority has also identified around 1,848 square kilometers of the land area which is highly vulnerable or highly prone to the landslides, and even so that includes 4.75% of the state's total area as a high landslide hazard zone. One thing that we need to understand, both anthropogenic factors and natural factors are responsible for the landslides, right? So when we talk about increasing frequency and intensity of landslides, anthropogenic factors have a key share in it. Okay, so anthropogenic factors are key contributor to the landslides in Kerala. For example, deforestation, is one reason. The commercial settlements is another reason, and villages and human settlements are very often located down hills. They are located down hills. They are located down slopes. So whenever the landslide events takes place, who are people who are residing, at the foothills would they gets impacted by this. And apart from that, 8% of the area in the entire Western Ghats in the southern state is labeled as the critical zone for the mass movements. So whenever there such mass movements are very often taking place, these mass movement could also trigger a landslide like events. Okay, so these mass movements include debris flow, landslides, rock falls, and even large scale slumps also. When we talk about the Western Ghats, so high population, so right, in recent times across the Western Ghats, the population density has been increasing manifold, and in fact a lot of settlements across the Western Ghats. So high population across Western Ghats and increasing population density, so this has been further increasing the vulnerability to such landslides. So whenever landslide events have been taking place, it has been triggering the massive loss of lives, the massive loss to infrastructure also, right? So when we compare landslides in the Western Ghats compared to the Himalayan states, in the Western Ghats, the landslide frequency and intensity has been increasing manyfold because of the human activities, and these human activities not at all paying any attention or any regard to the environmental conservation, environmental protection. Yesterday we have discussed about two important committees which were formed for the protection and conservation of the Western Ghats. So one committee was a Madhav Gadgil committee, right? So Madhav Gadgil committee, and another committee was Kasturi Rangan committee. So both these committees have recommended the protection and conservation of Western Ghats by declaring certain portion of Western Ghats as ecologically sensitive region or ecologically sensitive area. Right, so the recommendations of these two committees are not properly implemented, and that has been triggering such events across Kerala, and which has been resulting in the loss of lives and damages to the infrastructure and property. Right, so landslides in the Western Ghats are also primarily influenced by the soil cover on steep slopes. So one thing that we need to understand about the Western Ghats when we compare Western Ghats with the Eastern Ghats, so Western Ghats have a steeper slopes. It is a continuous mountain chain, and they also have the steeper slopes. And the other thing is that the soil on the steep slopes would have the greater probability of triggering a landslide like events compared to the gradual slopes of Eastern Ghats. Right, so soil cover across the Western Ghats is also another reason. And in fact, when we talk about globally the events like landslides, so landslides rank third in terms of deaths among the natural disaster. When we talk about all natural disaster, floods, tsunamis, cyclones, so when you look into all these events, landslides actually contribute to the third largest number of deaths globally. So therefore India is also vulnerable to landslides. There is no doubt about that. So however, there is a need to put in place adequate safety measures and adequate regulations and restrictions across the sensitive areas, across the vulnerable areas, and that is very important. And in fact, India is among the 4 major countries where the risk of landslides is one of its highest. And next important article is India's demographic dividend. Right, so demographic transition and growing old population and reducing the fertility rates. And what is the context? We'll understand the context. The context is that so India's aging population is growing rapidly. So as of now, India's population has been growing at a very rapid pace, with proportion of older persons expecting or it is expected to rise from 8.6% in the year 2011 to 20.8% by 2030. So this will be a massive increase in the old age population from 8.6 percentage to 20.8 percentage, and therefore it also raising a lot of concerns about the social security that has to be provided for the elderly population, because elderly population are not part of the workforce, or they are not formed part of the workforce. So therefore there will be an excess burden on the exchequer of the government. And on the other hand, when the government has been financing the old age population, increasing old age population, then of course the government need to compromise on the welfare spending. Welfare spending is also a very, very important aspect, right? So because on healthcare, and old age population also not forms part of the workforce, and there is also less tax income for the government, because increased number of people are not form part of the workforce. So all these problems that the country will face by the year 2050, and from 2050 onwards the old age population will start increasing in India. Okay, so rising elderly population, and there are certain policy gaps, and we should identify those policy gaps also, right? So when we talk about the variations within the states with respect to the population aging, southern states and a few northern states like Himachal Pradesh and Punjab have the higher elderly populations. Now when we talk about the national average, because in southern states, so they already achieved this population stabilization targets. So population growth has already slowed down in majority of the South Indian states along with Himachal Pradesh and Punjab. And because of that reason, when we compare the old age population in southern states and few northern states, these states have the higher old age population. And in fact, now India has been, from 2030 onwards, you can see there will be a rapid increase in the number of old age people in India. So unlike Western India, Eastern India, West and East, South Asian countries, that includes India also, so they are experiencing the rapid aging within 20-30 years. So within 20-30 years, these majority of South Asian countries would see a rapid aging, and that would pose challenges to the social protection of the elderly population, because the responsibility of social protection of elderly population falls on the government. And there are certain policy gaps also. We need to identify these policy gaps. When we identify these policy gaps, then we can plug them, and we could also come up with better policies. And these better policies actually aimed at social protection of the elderly population, and at the same time providing more and more welfare, and at the same time ensuring that the government exchequer is adequately getting taxes, right? So unlike the East Asian countries, India lacks the universal public pension, right? So the old age population, we need to talk about the social security. Now social security is provided by the old age pension. So unlike majority of the East Asian countries, India as of now lacks a universal public pension. Pension is not given to every older person or old age person, right? So adequate health insurance schemes for the elderly are also lacking in India. However, when we talk about the existing welfare programs which are in India, they are targeting those below the poverty line only. There were no universal public pension schemes, and this has to be looked into when we are talking about the social protection or social safety nets for the elderly population, right? So some data you can go through it, right? So 25% of the Indians aged over 60 experiences poor health facilities, right? They experience poor health. They would cope up with number of health related problems. The problem is a poor healthcare infrastructure and inadequate healthcare support for the elderly further added to this problem, right? So 1 in 4 elderly have multiple morbidity issues, and disabilities also affect around 40% of the elderly population in India. And in fact 78% of the seniors or senior citizens in India, they do not get any pension benefits at all. So therefore we can say that they never enjoy any social protection schemes from the government. And in fact, only 18% of the senior citizens are also covered under the health insurance scheme. So during the old age, health insurance coverage is very, very important, because families cannot very often afford the higher healthcare costs of the elderly population. But only 18% of the elderly population covered with the health insurance is a cause of concern. And 1 in 2 male seniors work, while 1 in 4 female seniors work. So with this, it will further increase the problems for the elderly woman. Okay, so feminization of poverty, right? So in a similar way, poverty levels, especially among the women who are elderly, will increase. They would be more and more vulnerable. Okay, so you can go through all these details, right, with respect to aging in India. And there is a need for care and financial security challenges, so that have to be looked into first. Okay, so a longitudinal aging survey has been conducted, and this longitudinal aging survey has been indicating that there are multiple morbidities among the elderly population that we have discussed just now, right? So number of elderly people who are above 60 years have been facing the multiple morbidities, okay, which are being influenced by the geographical factors, the social factors, economic factors including lack of social security, social safety nets for the elderly population. There are certain geographical disadvantages also, social disadvantages also. Social disadvantages in the sense that caste-based discrimination, the social status, so everything has to be taken care of. And apart from that, when we talk about the family structures in the urban areas, so the family structures in urban areas have been placing the caregiving stress on women, right? So caregiving is left to women, or it has been stressed on women. So caregiving is looked at as a responsibility of women. However, the rural elderly often living alone. So in rural areas, we very often see that the elderly people live alone due to migration of the younger family members, right? So we can say that the elderly population in rural areas have been there is no care. They actually deprived of care, because the family members very often migrated to the urban areas due to a number of reasons, and they are alone at their homes, and there are no caregivers for them. And in fact, financial insecurity is also another problem that the elderly have been facing. There is a report called HelpAge India report of 2024. Right, so HelpAge India report of 2024, and this particular report has been highlighting that there is a poor coverage of social pensions, there is a poor coverage of social safety nets and security nets, and it has been further limiting the access to government health insurance, right? So whenever people, especially the old age people, having a poor coverage to social pensions, and even they are having limited access to the government health insurance schemes. If they have access to health insurance schemes and pensions, so it would amounts to the social security of old age people. So therefore it has been leading to the financial insecurity among most of the elderly. So elderly population are also being are also vulnerable, and they are also facing abuses, right? So next article is about the Terracota pipeline that has been dating back to the 6th century BCE. So that was unearthed in Keeladi archaeological site, excavation at Keeladi archaeological site. So we will understand this. So where is this Keeladi archaeological site is located, and what is the significance of this particular finding? Okay, so archaeologists have recently unearthed a terracotta pipeline which belonged to the 10th phase of the excavation in Keeladi. So Keeladi is a very important site that belongs to the Sangam age. And if you read the ancient Indian history, you can also go through the Sangam age in the ancient Indian history. So Sangam age essentially consists of Pandyas, Chola and Cheras. right? So these three kingdoms consisting of Sangam age, so that was flourished in present day Tamil Nadu, Kerala and southern Andhra Pradesh in 6th century BCE to 3rd century BCE, right? So it has provided the recent Terracota pipeline has shown the evidence of the effective water management practices which are being followed by the settlements at settlements of inhabitants at least 2600 years ago, right? So how we can call the Indus Valley civilization and its town planning is one of the most important urban town planning, or the first of its kind town planning in entire world, specifically in India. In a similar manner, so this pipeline is also discovered, right? So Keeladi, so that was first discovered. So Keeladi is located in Tamil Nadu, right? So it is located in Tamil Nadu and it was first discovered in the year 2014. And Keeladi is located just 12 kilometers southeast of a Madurai town in Tamil Nadu, and in fact it has become a tourist spot in the ancient city. So that was once ruled by the Pandya kingdom. Pandyas have ruled the deep southern part of Tamil Nadu. Pandyas have ruled the southern part of Tamil Nadu and Cholas have ruled the northern part of Tamil Nadu, and Cheras belong to the present day Kerala, right? So Keeladi is an excavation site and that was identified in the year 2014, and it is located in the present day southern Tamil Nadu near Madurai. It was once under the Pandya kingdom during the Sangam age. So over 20,000 artifacts and different antiquities were recovered from this Keeladi site. Okay, so from this archaeological site, around 20,000 artifacts and different antiquities have been recovered in the past 9 years when the excavation has started by the Archaeological Survey of India. And in fact, these different artifacts and antiquities have actually revealed the inhabitants' advanced water management skills, especially the pipeline that is recently unearthed. However, the discoveries at the Keeladi archaeological site in Tamil Nadu have actually pushed the start of the Sangam era to 600 BCE from previously believed that it was Sangam age, previously believed that it belonged to 300 BCE, but now the dating of the Sangam age pushed back to the 600 BCE. So the archaeologists now came to the conclusion that the Sangam age now flourished from 600 BCE onwards. Additionally, rice husks which are being found in burial urns in Sivakalai, so they are also dating back to 3200 years, and evidence also shows that Tamils were aware of iron technology as far back as 2172 BCE, so that amounts to 4200 years ago. And in fact, a people of Indus Valley civilization, they don't have knowledge, they don't have knowledge about the iron. So that one thing we need to remember, they don't have knowledge about the iron. However, so when we talk about the age of Indus Valley civilization, so majority of the historians agree that it is dating back from 3000 BCE to 1500 BCE. So therefore you can imagine that people in deep part of the southern India, especially in Tamil Nadu, at a place called Sivakalai, so people also have the knowledge of iron way before the Indus Valley civilization, right? So therefore Keeladi has actually providing important insights into the ancient India's important evidence about ancient India's Sangam period, right? So we need to talk about the Sangam period. So Sangam period in South India, so it is south of the Krishna river and south of the Tungabhadra river, right? So there are in southern India there are rivers like Krishna river and Tungabhadra river and Kaveri river, and Sangam period also flourished around southern part of Krishna and Tungabhadra rivers around the present day Kaveri river. So they actually spanned roughly from 3rd century BC to 3rd century AD, right? So they actually spanned from this particular period. So earlier the scientists, the historians believe that it belonged to the 3rd century BC, but because of the recent findings and the evidences have pushed the date back to the 6th century BC. And in fact, the Sangam age is actually named after the Sangam academics. So it is believed that 3 Sangams were held, right? So 3 Sangams were held. So you have to also go through the Sangam age, Sangam society, Sangam economy, Sangam polity, and religious conditions that were existed at that point of time, right? So you need to go through everything, because Sangam age is also very, very important for prelims and mains examination perspective. So it is believed that there were 3 Sangam academics were held under the royal patronage of the Pandya kings of Madurai. Okay, so some of the important literary works that were produced at that point of time, Tolkappiyam of Tolkappiyar, and so all those literary works are being produced during the Sangam academies, so that were held under the royal patronage of the Pandya kings of Madurai. Okay, so apart from that, when we talk about you can see Madurai, so which is located on the banks of Vaigai river, south of the Kaveri river. So the southern part of Tamil Nadu is ruled by the Pandya, and the northern part of Tamil Nadu is ruled by the Cholas, and the western part of southern India is ruled by the Cheras. The present day Kerala is ruled by the Cheras, right? So it is ruled by the Pandyas, and you can also see the location of Kiladi, which is very close to the Madurai city. However, according to Tamil legends, so as I have already told you that there were 3 important Sangam academics were held. The first Sangam was held at Madurai, and however there were no literary work available. A voluminous literature was produced, but it was way back, so therefore no evidence has been available about the first Sangam that was held at Madurai, and second Sangam was held at Kapadapuram, and only Tolkappiyam of Tolkappiyar was survived. Only this particular literary work has been survived from the second Sangam age at Kapadapuram, and third Sangam was also again held at Madurai. So from this third Sangam, a few works have been survived, right? So the age declined towards the end of the 3rd century AD. The Sangam age started declining from the 3rd century AD. It is believed that Sangam age flourished in the deep part of the southern India from 3rd century BCE to 3rd century AD. So from 3rd century AD onwards, the Sangam age started declining, because Kalabras, another kingdom, so they have occupied Tamil country post this Sangam period, right? So they have ruled from 300 AD to 600 AD, marking an interregnum of dark age as per the earlier historians, right? So that has resulted in, when Kalabras have taken over this Sangam age, or the entire Sangam dynasty, so then that has resulted in the dark age in the southern India as discovered by the historians. So today we have one important mains practice question, and yesterday we have discussed about the Western Ghats and the ecological sensitive nature of Western Ghats and the threats that Western Ghats have been facing. But today also we have one important question, so that is also with respect to the landslides, because it is very important topic when we talk about the disaster management in general studies paper 3, or even general studies paper 1 geography section also. It is very, very important topic, so therefore we'll discuss about that. The question is, disaster preparedness is the first step in any disaster management process, right? So disaster preparedness is very, very important, and it is recognized as the first step in any disaster management process. Now explain how the disaster zonation mapping will help disaster mitigation in the case of landslides, right? So there is a need for disaster or hazard zonation mapping, and how this hazard zonation mapping, so identifying the vulnerable areas into different zones, like how we have done with respect to earthquakes. Now how it will help in disaster mitigation in the case of landslides, and that is the question. So what is the approach of the answer? When we talk about the approach, so we need to understand what is a disaster preparedness, right? So that should be the introduction, a basic introduction, what should be the disaster preparedness, and then you need to write the significance of disaster preparedness as a first step. Okay, because the first part of the answer, it is asked disaster preparedness is the first step. So you briefly discuss about that, and then you can define landslides, and then you need to write about the landslide zonation mapping and how it will help the disaster mitigation in the context of landslides. And ultimately you can conclude stressing on the need to control or regulate the activities and protective the eco-sensitive nature of these areas to prevent the loss of lives and also damages to the infrastructure due to the landslides, right? So when we talk about this, so as I've already told you, first you need to briefly define what is disaster preparedness, right? So when we talk about disaster preparedness, it actually consists of a set of measures, right? So disaster preparedness consisting of set of measures which are being undertaken by different stakeholders. So who are those stakeholders? So that includes government, organizations, individuals, or different communities, civil society, right? So all these stakeholders would undertake a certain measures, right? So these measures essentially aimed at responding and coping up with the immediate aftermath of a disaster, right? So before we had the first hand information about the disaster, so once the early warning is issued about the disaster and aftermath of the disaster, so how the response should be, so everything comes part of the disaster preparedness. So whether it is a man-made disaster or human-induced disaster, or a disaster which is being caused by the natural hazards, right? So this is how you need to briefly define or describe the disaster preparedness. And secondly, so you can see here, so this is the disaster management cycle. In this disaster management cycle, the disaster preparation or preparedness is the first step, right? So that would result in response and then recovery, and then it would also result in mitigation of the negative impact of the disasters, even if they take place in the future, because adaptation and mitigation are very important aspects when we talk about the disaster management, and even with respect to the negative consequences of the climate change, right? So a disaster preparedness, so it actually works based on the assumption that disasters will happen regularly, and due to climate change, disasters have been occurring at regular intervals, and the frequency and intensity has also been increasing. However, so measures can be implemented, right? So different stakeholders would take a number of measures, and those measures would be implemented to reduce the effect of the disaster. And disaster preparedness actually involve a certain things, right? So it actually deals with the certain things. So what are those things? So first and foremost, it is very important that we need to assess the risk, so that is being tended from one particular disaster. Okay, so once we assess the risk of a disaster, the measures can be implemented, right? So suitable and appropriate measures can be found out, and those measures can be implemented, and early warning systems can also be implemented, can also be issued to people who are living in the vulnerable areas, right? So disaster preparedness includes the risk assessment of vulnerable areas firstly, secondly issuing early warning systems also. And apart from that, the life safeguarding equipment, for example, cyclone shelters, have to be constructed. So this is also part of the disaster preparedness. For example, imagine that India has a huge coastal area, and these coastal areas, both Bay of Bengal and Arabian Sea, would see regular cyclones, and the intensity and frequency of these cyclones has also been increasing. Now, in this context, imagine that if a cyclone has started emerging in the Bay of Bengal region, and it is going to hit Odisha and northern part of Andhra Pradesh. Now, in this case, the governments, communities, civil society, and different organizations would come together, and they would set up shelters. They first evacuate the people who are living in the vulnerable areas so that we could reduce the loss of lives, right? So cyclone shelters would be provided, and in these shelters sanitation, drinking water, medicine, food and some other essentials would be provided until the cyclone comes to an end, right? So until the negative effect of the cyclone comes to end or cyclone makes a landfall, so people would be evacuated from their homes, and they would be placed under the shelter homes for some time so that we could substantially reduce the loss of lives. So therefore this is also part of the disaster preparedness. And apart from that, resources and emergency kits in anticipation of the need have to be procured, have to be arranged, and maintaining emergency rosters are also very important, and evacuation plans have to be put in place. So we need to immediately evacuate the people, and we need to regularly issue early warnings, and emergency information and communication systems should also properly managed so that the information can be reached to all the communities. And in fact, the training to ensure adequate emergency response capacity, and even maintenance preparedness levels, and public education and preparedness campaigns, so all these things are part of the disaster preparedness. And apart from that, so it is specifically disaster preparedness specifically asked about the landslides, and especially the hazard zonation mapping in the landslide prone areas. Now what is a landslide? So you just briefly define a landslide. Landslide is a geographical phenomenon, and this actually involves sudden or rapid movement of mass of rock, soil, debris down the slope under the influence of gravity, and that is landslide, right? So in India, Western Ghats, Northern Himalayas and Eastern Himalayas are highly vulnerable, highly prone to the frequent landslides. Now in this context, hazard zonation mapping actually help in disaster mitigation. We need to understand how this hazard zonation mapping will help in disaster mitigation, particularly with respect to the landslides. Because when we categorize the vulnerable areas into different zones, so we would be able to identify these areas or the regions which are susceptible to the landslides, which are vulnerable to the landslides. So therefore appropriate measures and even restrictions, regulations can be implemented in those vulnerable areas based on the degree of vulnerability to the landslides. And we could also better characterize, we can also better analyze the physical characteristics of that particular area which is vulnerable to landslides, such as the slope angle, the geology type and rainfall that has been taking place, and even vegetation cover, if there is any human settlements, commercial activities, infrastructure projects. So everything can be better analyzed with respect to having this hazard zonation mapping. So that can be identified with different degrees of such susceptibility to landslides, and this information can be used to prioritize disaster mitigation efforts in the high risk zones or high disaster prone areas. However, in areas which are identified as high risk zones, early warning systems can be developed, right? So these early warning systems would regularly provide alerts to the citizens to evacuate in case of a landslide. So early warning system should be in place, alerts should be given regularly. So all these things are very important. So by using this hazard zonation mapping, so authorities can actually identify the critical areas, right? So authorities can actually successfully identify certain critical areas, and the early warning systems should be installed beforehand. And in case of any such event has been taking place, these early warnings should be given so that the villagers or people who are living in these vulnerable areas could be shifted to another place, could be evacuated as early as possible. And in fact, this hazard zonation mapping will also help disaster managers a better disaster preparedness, and they would undertake a certain proactive measures so that would mitigate the impact of the landslides in the longer term. When we talk about the conclusion, you just have to conclude this answer by emphasizing on the importance of disaster zonation mapping with respect to landslide, because it plays a very important role in disaster mitigation by identifying the risk areas, especially the high risk areas, have high vulnerability areas for the landslides. And then the authorities would also take appropriate measures, and those measures would also be implemented on ground based on the degree of vulnerability of these regions to the landslides. So therefore, by prioritizing disaster preparedness and even taking advantage of such tools, so we can better protect our communities, we can reduce damage to the infrastructure, and we can minimize the loss of life and even property because of increasing natural disasters and their intensity. So that's how you could conclude this answer. And that's all in this lecture, and thank you so much. So if you like our work, please subscribe our YouTube channel and also hit the like button. Thank you.